Yay, we're live.
We are live, true crimers. Welcome to Break the Case. I'm your host. I'm Jen Coffindaffer. I am thrilled to have you guys here. This case has really been fast breaking. And I want to talk a little bit about that before I introduce my fabulous guest. I already have her sitting here in studio so she can listen in. But as most of you know, the case that we're really taking a deep dive into is the case of Brian Thompson, who was murdered, CEO of United Healthcare. And the person that's been charged in now multiple jurisdictions is Luigi Maggioni. Last night, we took a deep dive into the legal possibilities and probabilities. And at that time, and really, if you look back right after he was arrested, I said, why aren't we doing this federally? I mean, I could tell you if I were the special agent in charge of the New York office, I would be all over this. We all know Trump has no love lost for Bragg, the DA in New York. So even though he hasn't taken office yet, there is no doubt that the FBI wanted to come in and the U.S. Attorney's Office and charge this federally. I found it very interesting, though, they chose not to charge terrorism charges. And why would you need to? There was interstate, he traveled interstate to commit a murder. This is punishable by the death penalty in the federal jurisdiction. In New York, they don't have the death penalty, so Luigi didn't have to worry about it. The only venue is New York and the feds. And the feds have trumped the New York charges. It will be adjudicated, at least initially, federally, and then we'll see what happens, if anything, with the New York charges. But they still are on the books. He was indicted. He was charged via what we call criminal complaint. There's three ways to charge: by information, by indictment, and by criminal complaint. They did a criminal complaint. That's where an officer writes out the probable cause they have to charge somebody. That's what happened. They did this with lightning speed, in a sense, what we can all see. But I could tell you from day one in the background, as you know, the FBI was the main people investigating this. I mean, this investigation spanned from San Francisco to Pennsylvania to New York, Atlanta. This is the very definition of a federal crime of murder. Textbook. So I'm glad they charged it. I'm also glad they did not charge terrorism. Yesterday, when we spoke, I said, I think that is just such a reach. Bragg, though, is known to reach. He reached with Penny, and he reached so far into the well trying to overcharge him with manslaughter. He lost that charge, and then he lost the other charge, I think, because when he threw out the manslaughter charge after he didn't want a hung jury, that left all sorts of problems in that case too. So now Penny has absolutely nothing, he's been found not guilty. And so he walks a free and innocent man of any wrongdoing concerning Jordan Neely. Moving on, though, to this. I just wanted to get everybody caught up. Also, it was a huge extravaganza. I mean, they flew him with NYPD helicopter. They did that because they wanted it expeditiously, right? They didn't want to drive 280 something miles from Pennsylvania over there, a big caravan. I don't know if people understand the amount of work and the amount of manpower that would have required would have been ridiculous. But to fly him is much easier. A lot of people are asking, why in the world do we have this huge SWAT tactical contingent? And I mean, it looks like a scene from Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal Lecter, and they're afraid he's going to spring loose. It is not about him springing loose. It's about protecting him. There's people who would love to kill him just for the notoriety. There's people who would love to kill him because they think it's terrible that he's become some sort of figure of a martyr or a revolutionary. They're angry at that. And then there are a lot more people that are very angry at the healthcare system. That's the stance they've, really jumping on right now, albeit, in my opinion, for the first time. All these accounts, all these creators, all these people stirring it up in social media. I never heard them say one thing about healthcare. Now, all of a sudden, because Luigi Mangione is really lining their pockets with money they can make on their platforms, if you take the stance that Luigi Mangione is some sort of saint, your platform is going to blow up with support because that's just what's happening. And so I'm seeing all of a sudden healthcare, rise to the top of their platforms for the first time ever. But not to digress, today's session, we are going to focus in on the mental health, mental state, what is really going on with Luigi Mangione. And I am thrilled to have Dr. Epright here. She's a friend of the show. She's joined us on a couple of other programs, particularly about the Adelsons. And then we got into big time about our friend who decided to kill her mother and then get out and sort of become a movie star. So we dug deep into those personalities. But today we're going to talk to Dr. Epright because she's an expert. It was funny when I was talking to Dr. Bracata not long ago. We talk all the time, and he had watched a program that Dr. Epright was on, and he said, "Oh my gosh, I am so glad you got Carmela. She's so good. There's so few in the industry. It's kind of like FBI agents. I mean, we don't all know each other, but when we're active duty, boy, you intersect with everybody. And it's even smaller, I think. It'd probably be more like the SWAT team contingents where you get to know each other. They all know each other. And the amount of respect that Dr. Picata has for Dr. Epright and vice versa is just so great. I love listening to both of them, bouncing ideas, bouncing thoughts off of both of them. And then, as you all know, we had Dr. Greg McCrary in, famous FBI profiler, worked alongside of John Douglas, started the FBI's behavioral science unit back in the 60s. He's the grandfather. He is the man when it comes to really profiling, at least on behalf of the FBI. We had him yesterday. I'm thrilled to welcome Carmela. All right, I've been jabbering on. Carmela currently is a doctor, again, a PhD, teaching in the philosophy area at Furman University, but her background is heavy in behavioral psychology. Dr. Carmela, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. That introduction was amazing. I couldn't, nothing in my life could prepare me for Braccato saying that he respected me. It makes me wonder what I've done right in my life. So I'm really happy to be here with you about this case. Very difficult case.
Can you just a little bit just touch on your education as far as what you did at Brown, what you've done in this area, just really briefly, to give our audience just a flavor of the type of education you have in this area?
Yeah, because it sounds a little weird to introduce me as a philosopher. So I'm a professor of philosophy at Furman, as you said. I'm also a clinical professor of neuropsychiatry at the University of South Carolina and a clinical professor of biomedical sciences at the University of South Carolina in Greenville. But my background, I have a postdoc in psychiatry, and I worked with the fellowship program at University of South Carolina in specifically forensic psychiatry. So that is my area of research, which is why, I have this background, even though I'm a philosophy professor. So I want to really talk about sort of the forensic psychiatry aspect of this. Like, are there mental health problems that are of issue here? How might they relate to his sentencing or his trial?
Great. No, there's so much right now on social media, and not to be rude, and I guess I could put myself in the same sentence. My background in dealing with people is from being an FBI agent and a federal agent 28 years, right? Dealing with these psychotic, crazed people. But the study of it and understanding how people tick really, that is your bailiwick. And I haven't heard people with your background and expertise really talking much about Luigi Mangione. I first want to get into what people are calling the manifest. I know you've had a chance to look at it. I posted it on Twitter, the key points that were taken out for the criminal complaint. Talk to us about your initial thoughts of the manifest.
I think we should stop calling it a manifesto. I think really would be better. I almost think that it romanticizes him a bit. There's already this sort of view in the world of him as a, folk hero with respect to healthcare. And I do have many things to say about that. I probably take a slightly different view than you do about talking about healthcare, because I've been talking about healthcare for decades, right? So I'm glad that we're having a conversation about healthcare. But I don't like that he's being, heralded as a sort of folk hero. But I also think that giving too much attention, right? I think charging him with terrorism is a little problematic too, because it really sort of highlights that he is famous and special, and that we need to take this seriously in a way that we don't take other crimes seriously. Clearly, you're absolutely right. He crossed state lines. I definitely think this should be federal. But I kind of think that everyone should take a drink of water and kind of sit down for a few minutes and calm down about, this isn't the most important case in the entire world. And it's not a manifesto. We started using the word manifesto with the Unabomber. But the manifesto with the Unabomber, it was 35,000 words. It was approximately 70 pages long. This was a long-term project for the Unabomber. It was well thought out. It was, he really thought that he was communicating something. I'm obviously not glamorizing him either. And then, of course, this has become the thing now, is to have a manifesto. So Dylan Roof, when he brutally slaughtered 9 people in a church in Charleston, South Carolina, had a manifesto, which in his case was sort of a cut and paste from the internet, right? So we've sort of like all the criminals now, all the people that do mass violence or high profile violence have to have a manifesto. This is approximately a page long, and it's kind of rambling and disorganized, and it reads to me like a note, not like a manifesto. And I just sort of think like making it a manifesto sort of highlights his importance and sort of glamorizes him in a way that I don't think is a good idea.
It's interesting you say that. And by the way, I think I was saying manifest for some reason. Manifesto. I think I was forgetting the O. But anyway, back to the okay, I'm going to call it a note because it is so rambling. It's, to me, it looked like what I do with my notes on my computer, or not on my computer, on my phone. I write these little notepad notes, and they're kind of like all over the place. Hey, basically reminding myself and things he talks about. But I want to point out just a couple of things and get your thoughts on it. One thing that stuck out was he has this sense always of he's lucky, right? Oh gosh, this is so, basically, he doesn't use the word fortuitous, but it's fortuitous that I procrastinated, because I procrastinated, and look at what this meant. It meant that I was able to find out more about Thompson and his company. I think specifically says Thompson's company, which helped him to perpetrate the crime. What do you make of somebody that, first of all, how it struck me was he's a procrastinator. And then secondly, somebody that no matter when he messes up, like in other words, that's a bad quality to have, he still sort of aggrandizes himself. Hey, I'm still great, even though I procrastinate, because look, it worked out. That's how I took it. What do you say, Doc?
That's hilarious. It reminds me of my cat. Cats, when they jump and they miss, right? Like, I'm just making a joke out of it that like, oh no, I totally meant to do that. I mean, I look like an idiot, but I totally meant to do that. I think it's, narcissistic. I want to be careful. As I'm always careful with those terms. It's self-aggrandizing. I'm not saying he has narcissistic personality disorder. I'm merely saying that he sort of wants to put himself in the center of the debate here and aggrandize himself that, I'm really the first person. I'm the first person to make this an issue. No, you're not. You're not the first person to make this an issue. You're just the first person to slaughter a CEO on the street, right? And so again, continuing to sort of emphasize the importance of this, when I do think it's a little rambling, and it does seem, he starts it out by saying, this is why I did it. So he's clearly he's clearly presenting it as though as an explanation. So he is writing it to someone else, but he's doing it badly because it's a really rambling statement. And it's not a manifesto. He doesn't give all of his carefully thought out reasoning for what he's doing. In fact, what we find out is that he actually wasn't a patient of United Healthcare at all. So it's interesting that he chose this person. If he had a manifesto and a plan, why aren't you explaining why it was this guy?
Well, and I found that interesting because in his note, what he specifically says is, you know what? I'm going to go with healthcare because it checks all the boxes. You're going to go with healthcare because it checks all the boxes? I mean, so this tells me this wasn't this huge, grandiose plan to particularly talk about healthcare. This wasn't about a healthcare revolutionary movement. Other people have tried to make it into that, and that's why, again, I think this whole terrorism nexus doesn't fit as well as New York might thinks it fit. This is just my opinion, but don't you find that interesting that he says, I'm going to go with healthcare, and he says because it checks all my boxes. So that's not specific at all. To me, that's rambling. What did you make of that?
That's a very interesting thing to say, right? I do not want to minimize the conversation that's been going on here about healthcare. I'm not saying I'm grateful to him, because obviously I'm not grateful for a murder. And also, no one should be grateful for a murder, right? This guy has an Ivy League education. If he wanted to make a statement about healthcare, he had all of the background to be able to do that in an articulate way. But I don't want to minimize the fact that it has started a conversation, and a conversation that I think is incredibly important. I wish he wasn't the catalyst for that, but I don't want to minimize that. I think there are real problems, and this is bringing those real problems to light. I'm sorry that it had to be, you know, that a murderer had to make that an issue such that we would talk about it, but I'm awfully glad that we're talking about it. Does that make
But
sense?
it makes sense, but is it really was it really even his point? The way he talks in that note, it's almost like he's going over it in his mind. Let's see. Let's go with healthcare. I think this might work. It checks some boxes. I
I'm gonna
mean,
go
what
back
were
and
the
look at
boxes
that.
he really wanted to check?
I'm gonna go back and look at that because I don't really quite read it that way. But so what were the boxes he wanted to check? I mean, it depends on what his goals were, right? Everyone is reading his goals as making a statement about healthcare. Um, but if what he's trying to do is check boxes, then he's not trying to make a statement about healthcare as much as he is making a statement about how important he is.
Yes,
Maybe,
that's how I
right?
see it too.
That I am really important, and, that we made him a folk hero kind of gives him everything he wants to get, right? I mean, he if you are narcissistic, again, I'm not saying narcissistic personality disorder, we need to be very careful about that, but if he is, self-aggrandizing, he wants to prove how important he is, let me choose an issue that's gonna get attention, and boy, was he ever successful. And sort of the more we give him attention and the more we, elevate him to writing a manifesto, or even really, and I suspect you and I disagree about this, even really calling him a terrorist, right? A terrorist wants to strike terror among an enormous population. This guy killed one CEO. And obviously, this is a CEO. This is a man that, had children and a family. He was a real human being. If you really want to make a statement about healthcare, you are not doing a damn thing by killing an individual, right? Luigi Mangione is smart enough to know that healthcare is systemic, and you are not going to change healthcare by killing a single person, right? And you are going to change it in some ways by starting a conversation, but he never actually says that. He never actually says that I did this because I want to start an important conversation about something that is desperately troubling to so many people. I can speak to this myself. I have a chronic illness and a chronic pain condition. I recently turned down a surgery for a couple of reasons, but one of them was it was incredibly expensive. and it was going to cost me a lot of money. I have a chronic illness. My son has a chronic illness, or seems to have a chronic illness, and it means that we pay thousands of dollars a month. I want that conversation to be started. But if you're going to do that, he's doing it in a really disorganized way. It's sort of everyone else has started that conversation, and he, at the end of the day, is a murderer.
Yeah, I mean, very well said. There's something else that really stuck out to me to your point here, and that is he wants to make sure that everyone knows it was his money. That's what he says. It was my money that was used to sort of perpetrate all of this, no one else's. He wants all the glory. He doesn't want, I guess, mom or dad to think it's trust fund money or whatever, the traveling, the purchasing of everything he, all the expenses involved in all of this, that it was his money and, that he wants the feds to track that. What does that tell you?
Again, it's sort of putting himself at the center of the question, right? I want to be at the center of the question. Again, I do sort of read it slightly differently. I mean, he starts out with, just so you don't do a lot of investigation and waste a lot of time, I acted alone. And I can sort of see that. I mean, if you really were making a manifesto to say, hey, don't go digging around, this was all me. But you're right. Again, what that does is, I'm the center of attention. I am special. I did this all by myself. Look at me. Look at, you should be proud of how much I did this, and I didn't need anyone else's help to do it. So I think that's sort of what you're saying too, right?
That is what I'm saying. And I might be, wrong with this, but if you're going to be somebody who's a revolutionary because you believe you are so wronged, I'll take an odd duck to pull out of this. I'll take Castro because everybody knows who he is. He and his rebels, they had it. They were willing to give their lives for what they believed. That to me is a person with a revolutionary idea, with something that's so much bigger than them, that they're willing to give their life for it. And I don't know how you took it, but when I saw that he had retained counsel in Pennsylvania, which would have been tens of thousands of dollars, even though it was a short amount, you can guarantee those bills racked up at $650 plus an hour. Certainly his New York attorneys, I have no idea what that retainer is. I would guess triple digits, especially if
That's
they're thinking
probably
about.
not his money. That's going to be his
Well,
parents' money.
that's the point. It's all his parents' money. And if you really don't like, you see what they're doing in New York, right? These parades that say eat the rich, it's expanded far beyond healthcare. Now it's rich people are terrible, CEOs are terrible, kill them all. I mean, I'm just saying what is happening. And yet he's the rich one. So help us understand, Dr. Epright, what is with this sort of, to me, a rebellion with where he comes from and really inciting anger toward the rich, toward people who I suppose can afford healthcare.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's people who can afford healthcare, if it's the leader of a healthcare organization that really did deny a lot of people healthcare, which, as we know, they do, and they profit off of people's sickness. Um, I think what's interesting about what you said is, you don't buy that that was the plan, right? In Castro's case, it was the plan, and I am willing to give my life for it. This is one guy with a backpack, and he gets caught in a McDonald's. It is actually kind of funny, and I read this somewhere, that, for someone who's really making this profound critique about corporate America, he goes to a Starbucks before he does the murder, and then he gets caught in a McDonald's. You're not doing a very good job of, like, eating the rich, right? You are really contributing to capitalism in this way. I do think he started a movement, but maybe the movement isn't really about him. We should stop sort of putting him at the head of a movement. And I think your example about Castro is right. Right? This is not a man who was like, look, I am willing to die for these principles. I am willing to go out and really put myself on the line. It's no, I'm going to create a ghost gun because I'm smart enough to know how to do that. And I also have access to a 3D printer, right? I have access to all these things that other people don't have. And I'm going to go with my extraordinarily expensive backpack, right? Everything about this was sort of reeks of privilege. Now I'm going to point out that I am saying things right now that are very different than the views of some of the people that I love the most in the world, who really do in some ways see this person as a folk hero, not because they're horrible people, but because they really do care about healthcare. And but you're right to say this isn't a person that was willing to give his life. This is not a working class hero here. This is a privileged young man who used his privilege to make a statement. Now, I think everybody else is actually taking that up and doing these critiques. And I think the critiques are important. I'm sorry that they were led by this, but the critiques are important. I do think we should listen to them. I think we should listen to people's real struggles with healthcare. And again, I pointed out I'm one of them. I'm middle class, I have good healthcare insurance, and yet I struggle with it. There is something to be said about healthcare, but maybe we should stop putting him in the center of that debate. He might have started the debate, but he's not the center of it. He really isn't what we've given him credit for. So
Well, I would have
have
had
the debate without glamorizing him.
so much more respect for him if he would have said, no, listen, I'm not using any of my parents' money. Look at what my bank account statements are. Look at what I really have. I'm indigent, because I think a court would find him indigent. And he should have had a federal public defender and gone with the public defender route. By the way, I want to say this about public defenders. In my experience, and I'll give you a good example. One case, we indicted 50 people at once. Well, actually 3 different cases, but the one I'm going to talk about is this particular one, is big wiretap. And the people were cartel members. They had millions and so much money. And they hired the DeGarens, very famous back in the day attorneys. And they all had these very expensive attorneys, and only one person could have a federal or a federal public defender, because you have an issue with more than one person having one. So in any event, the federal public defender was at my office, was sitting down, sorting through everything, looking at files. They looked at every picture. They asked me all these questions. They spent hours with me. Those high dollar rich attorneys, I never saw them. Never
Okay, you
saw
want to
them.
talk about working class
Terrible.
heroes? Public defenders, those are working class heroes. Those are people every day that are going to do the really, really hard work of justice, right? Whatever you think, even if you are pro prosecution, you should care a lot about people having good defense lawyers, right? Because we want to make sure that we get this right, and we want it to be
I agree.
fair, and we want to believe in a system, right? We want people to have good defense attorneys. And I love that you just brought that up, that public defenders really are doing sort of the Lord's work, right? They are defending people who are difficult to defend, or maybe even impossible to defend. I love that. And I love juxtaposing that with who really is the working class hero here. The guy that can afford to make a ghost gun, or the people who are going to defend people who have no money, but that, have no background, no money, and that really need to be defended. It need to be defended because we have a system that guarantees people the opportunity to defend themselves in court.
No, absolutely. I've always, and I don't want to digress too much on this because I really want to get back to your analysis of Luigi, but I just want to say I always juxtapose 2 cases that I think a lot of people in our audience might know about. The John O'Keefe case, cop killed by Karen Reed, purportedly.
Or not, she's not guilty yet until
Or right. She's been charged, hasn't been convicted yet, and could be acquitted. And I juxtaposed her to Sarah Boone. I do it all the time because I find the women so much alike. What they do, what they say, how they act, except one came from money, came from privilege, came from education. That's Karen Reed. and has this propaganda machine that she's hired, maneuvered, that are, I should say hired, but they're getting paid. They're getting their money, right?
A lot.
She
You're getting paid a lot.
got that going for her. And then you have Sarah Boone, who's, poor. And if you swapped places with those, like a trading places thing, oh my gosh, I would love to see each one of those in each other's shoes. But nevertheless, I've totally digressed. But it was just to the point we're talking about, is it's unfair that privilege can buy freedom. And it's true. I've seen it. I mean, privilege and having millions can buy the best attorneys. Listen, Luigi Mangione has one of the best attorneys. If I were in trouble in New York, I would want her or her husband.
I don't think
Or
it's gonna matter. I think he's going to prison, and I think he's going to prison for life. You
me too.
mentioned federal death penalty charges. I think it's really important to say that there are very, very few cases in the federal system that have resulted in a death penalty case, right? The last two that I can remember, Timothy McVeigh, a
Mhm.
genuine terrorist, right? Oklahoma City bomber.
He's a
Uh,
terrorist.
and that's a legit terrorist, right? And then the other one is, I can't think of his name right now, but didn't he also get the bombing, the marathon bomber, right?
Oh, yes,
Was
the marathon bomb, the Boston
He
bomber.
was also he's on federal death row, if I'm not mistaken. It is, the big cases, but for the most part, it is very hard in federal court to actually get the death penalty. It's much easier in states like, I am from Texas, right? That is a state that gives out the death penalty fairly frequently, but the federal government does not. But I do think this man is going to prison forever. I don't think he's going to get the death penalty. If I were a betting person, I don't think he's getting to the death penalty, but I do think he's going to be in prison forever.
I 100% agree that if convicted, he won't get the death penalty, but I think it could be used as a bargaining chip. And I've
Yeah.
said that from the beginning. Listen, they don't want a long, drawn out trial. And for everyone in the audience, this is going to be like a penny trial. In other words, you're not going to see anything, or a Delphi trial. You're not going to see anything. We're going to see sketches. We're going to hear from people in the courtroom what was said, which I hate, because that's not our lens on it. It's somebody else telling us how they took it. And I tell you, on Delphi, you could line up 3 different people who heard the same testimony and they add their own slant. So I have no idea what really was said. But again, not to digress, just to say that him being charged federally and the New York, it's going to be completely sequestered. We're not going to see him. And the person that's going to hurt is him. He's not going to be able to outburst for the media like he did the first go around. He's not going to be able to grandstand. And that really, I think, hurts what he's about. But who cares what I think? Doctor, what do you think about that statement?
I mean, do I think that we're going to hear anything? No, I think we're going to get snippets. I'm really a fan of cameras in the courtroom personally. I think it's a way of actually participating in the court system and democracy, and taking seriously that we are we the people, right? Um, and so I'm sad when that happens, right? I'm sad because, like, of course, what this will result in is even more sort of romanticizing this hero that we're not actually hearing the testimony from. Um, so would he grandstand? I think that's a really interesting question, because there has been a lot of discussion about whether or not Luigi Mangione is mentally ill, and whether or not his defense team will plead not guilty by reason of insanity. And I'm kind of curious what you think of that. I have many things to say about that. That actually is my area of expertise. Um, but I'm sort of curious. Tell me your view about a mental health defense.
I don't think they'll use it. And this is why. First of all, I don't think Luigi Mangione wants to use it. He doesn't
Right.
want to be seen as some sort of pathetic, mentally wacko. He was off the rails. I just don't think that, even if it would save him, he doesn't want to go there. I think he would rather take the stand, own it. And I mean, Hopefully, I think that's what I would try to use and try to appeal to getting one juror to feel sorry for him, you
Yeah.
know,
I
and
so
he's
this
so
is
well
what I
spoken.
what'd you say?
He's so well spoken, from what we've seen. I mean, he comes off well, charismatic.
Yeah, I mean, sort of, except when he was being arrested and he kept screaming out really irrational. Like it wasn't
Yeah.
that was not articulate. It was sort of, oh, you're the enemy of the people. I don't remember exactly what he said. Is you're the enemy of the people or something. He acted as though he was the representative of the people. No, I think you're right. I think this was also true going back to Ted Kaczynski. Ted Kaczynski did not want to to have an insanity defense, although I think he needed to have an insanity defense, because he kept saying it would undermine my message. It would undermine my message. I want to be really careful. This is why I come on shows like this, is to have a discussion about not guilty by reason of insanity. And I know that you know everything that I'm going to say, which is there is absolutely and positively no benefit whatsoever in pleading not guilty by reason of insanity. It is pled in less than 2% of all cases. And in federal cases, it's pled less than 1%. It fails 75% of the time, right? So you make a defense about mental illness, and 75% of the time you will lose. It's only successful 25% of the time. And when it is successful, you do not walk out and go home. You end up in very bad places, forensic psychiatric facilities, which if you want to punish someone, you send them to a forensic psychiatric facility. The benefit is that they get mental health treatment. The downside is those are horrible places to be. And so we're really afraid of mental health defenses in the United States. We think that people who are found not guilty by reason of insanity either go home or they go to a country club. And I'm telling you, as someone who spent a lot of time in forensic facilities, it ain't no country club, right? No one has any big flat screen TVs. So it is not to anyone's advantage to plead not guilty by reason of insanity. And in someone like Luigi Mangione's case, it is really not a benefit, because saying that you are mentally ill such that you did not know that what you were doing is wrong, which he could never make that case. It would be
Never.
impossible to make that case. Um, would undermine whatever message he had, right? Um, do I think he is mentally ill? I do think that's a different question, right? Because being mentally ill in and of itself, this is something that I would love to scream from the rooftops. Having a mental illness in and of itself is entirely irrelevant to a not guilty by reason. It's not entirely irrelevant. It is necessary. You have to prove that you have a mental illness, but it is not sufficient to prove not guilty by reason of insanity, right? You have to have a mental illness, but you also have to prove the very difficult criteria of that you didn't know that it was wrong, and or that you were not able to control your actions. That is not the case here. He knew that it was wrong. He did it because it was wrong. This is something that needs to be said more often about some of these big figures. He did it because he knew that it was wrong. He would never be successful in a not guilty by reason of insanity case. And even if he was, it would not benefit him.
So let me ask you, does he have, I know you haven't examined him, but from what
Right.
you've read, what you've seen, what he did, knowing his background, knowing the affluent part, knowing that he had back surgery, but that was in 2023, early 2023. After that, we know he vacationed in Hawaii, he went to Asia, he went to Japan, he went to Thailand. And then he kind of cut off communication during all of these travels that he was doing. Based on kind of just this whole picture you see, what do you see here?
Okay, so I can't diagnose anyone. Let's remember I'm a philosopher, but also I, have a lot of problems with people who get onto programs and think they can. But here's where I actually do think he's interesting, right? He he cut off contact. First of all, I think it needs to be said that if someone has a severe mental illness, it tends to show for men in particular in their 20s. He's actually getting a little late for men because he's 26 years old. So if you were to have a psychotic break, right, which I'm not suggesting he did, but I do think there's some mental illness stuff that's worthy of talking about. But those kinds of severe mental illnesses do tend to show up right around his age. So I do think that's worthy of consideration. He cut himself off from everyone. Apparently, he was in close contact. He had a lot of friends, right? People who are severely mentally ill have a hard time maintaining friendships and other relationships because they are so far gone. So, why am I concerned about him with respect to a mental illness? Is because he's right at the right age. He started to cut himself off from everyone. He sort of became kind of a nomad. He started wandering around, right? So, do I think it's possible that there's some mental illness things present? Yes, I do. I think those are worthy of consideration. Do I think they have anything at all to do with his defense? No, I do not. However, I do think we're going to have an interesting question with respect to competency to stand trial. And
Mm,
that might be very important in this case. So let me explain a little, if you don't mind. Let me
please
explain
do.
a little about competency to stand trial. There is so much passion built up around any discussion of mental illness in a criminal context. People just become absolutely apoplectic when you mention it, right? Like, oh my God, they're trying to get away with it. They're trying to get away with it. And I just want to start by saying no person who is severely mentally ill is getting away with anything, right? If they're found not guilty by reason of insanity, they don't go home. They go to terrible places. If we want to punish people, that's the way to do it. People get really mad about, oh, competency to stand trial. They're trying to get away with it. No, competency to stand trial means that you have a mental illness that is preventing you from understanding the charges against you, and you are unable to participate in your own defense, which again, if you are a prosecutor or if you're pro prosecution, you want people to stand trial and you want people to have the capacity to understand, because that is a Fifth Amendment right. We want that. We want our system to be fair. If you are found not competent to stand trial, you are institutionalized and you are usually medicated with or without, either against or with your own will. So, what that means is you are prevented from going to trial. Everybody wants to go to trial. We want, the prosecution wants people to go to trial. The defense wants people to go to trial. There is no benefit in being found not guilty. I'm sorry. There's no benefit in being found unable to stand trial, not competent to stand trial, because you are stuck in an institution and being medicated and being taught the court system, right? You were undergoing a lot of work and you still haven't been found guilty. So I just want to sort of tell everyone this is not something we should be afraid of, except that it's terrible. It means that we can't do what we all want to do, which is bring someone to trial. And it's not to the benefit of the person who's found not guilty. I'm sorry, I keep saying that wrong. It is also not to the benefit of someone who is found not competent to stand trial. There is nothing good about not being competent to stand trial.
And do you anticipate that?
Lots of people do anticipate that. I'm not sure what I think. I think it's going to be a very interesting thing. Um, I think most defense attorneys do not want someone to be found not competent to stand trial. I am wondering what's going on with this young man, right? I'm wondering what's going on with him. I don't wanna say he's not competent. I don't wanna say that he is mentally ill such that it undermines any message or, it takes away from the legitimacy of whatever he was trying to say, which is what he's worried about. I am wondering about a young man who breaks off from his family at the age of 26, which is just around the age we should be concerned about this. And also sort of you can have whatever political views you want, right? You can think healthcare is horrific, and it is. But Luigi Mangione has an Ivy League education. He knows enough or he should know enough to know that killing a CEO is not going to change an entire system. He was replaced, the CEO was replaced in his role the same day, right?
Mhm.
If what you
You
want to
bet.
do is make a statement and you want to change a system, You're not going to do it by getting rid of one person. And Luigi Mangione is certainly smart enough to understand that. So I'm wondering about what happened to this thin wall that made it so he could not control his conduct. It's one thing to say, I hate these people,
Mm.
I hate this system. And it's another thing altogether to sort of lose the impulse control such that you commit a murder. Does that make sense?
Yes, but talk to us about that. What has to happen to a person where they lose this impulse control? Why does that happen? And what are the signs of it?
Again, can't diagnose this person, never even met this person, heard him say a few things. In other words, I think what I want to say is there's a lot going on with this guy, and we're going to learn a lot about what was going on with this guy, right? This is a young man that kept in touch with his friends, that kept in touch with his parents, right? I also don't want to paint people with a chronic illness or chronic pain syndrome as mentally ill. Believe me, we're talking about me, right? We're talking about me here. But what I will say is that when you have a chronic illness and you are in a lot of pain, again, we're talking about me, uh, the chances that you might end up having a manifestation of a mental illness are higher, right?
Mhm.
So you have been in chronic pain. It sort of chips away at your ability to function psychologically. So I don't know what's going on with this person, but it has certainly been raised. It's talked about a lot in the media that he might be found not competent to stand trial. And I think what I just want to do is get the message out of this doesn't mean anyone's getting away with anything. And it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing from the standpoint of people who want him to go to prison. And it's not a good thing from the standpoint of his defense. But I do think in Luigi Mangione's particular case, it's definitely something that we should be paying attention to and asking questions about. What caused this Ivy League educated, from every report, brilliant young man to flip from being angry to being a murderer?
Back to my question, and not necessarily about Luigi, but broader than that. You talked about impulse control, and I found that fascinating because all of us, the only way we can function in society is to control our impulses, because we all have various impulses. I mean, you drive down the road and road rage. I mean, you're in
Right.
line at the grocery store and people think they got in line before you. I mean, you're playing on the tennis court, somebody hits you with the ball because they're mad about a line call, right? There's all these varying degrees. But as you said, what I mean, that's loss of basically all your impulse control. Is
Right.
is that correct when you're ready to take another life?
I mean, no, I want to be extremely careful about that. Right. I
And
do
I'm
not
not
want to
talking
see
about
it.
Luigi, generally.
Right, right. No, no, no. We want to be very careful. There's a lot of people who ask me this, which is, well, aren't all criminals mentally ill? The answer to that is no, absolutely not. Because what that would mean is we take everyone who's done a bad thing and we put them in a bucket called mental illness. And what we're doing there is we're not recognizing that most mentally ill people will absolutely never harm anyone. And most violent crime is not caused by people with mental illnesses, right? The vast majority, more than 90% of crimes are done by people who are absolutely in control of their faculties and make a choice not to do the right thing, right? That is the general thing. Not everybody who takes a life is, you know, out of touch with reality. In fact, very, very few are. So I want to be really careful to say, what does it mean to take a life? Does that mean you have to lose control of your faculties? No. Often you're completely in touch with your faculties and you do it intentionally. So I don't know. I said earlier in this that, that he might have done it because it was wrong. But I do think he was chipped away by his chronic pain. Let me let me backtrack. I think it is within the realm of possibilities that it was chipped away in him by his chronic pain condition, by his inability to function, right? He did go to Hawaii. There was an interview with someone who was his roommate in Hawaii. Um, and he did one surf lesson. This is obviously a young man who was very fit, right? We've all seen the pictures of his six-pack abs, right? Um, and he was obviously very athletic. And then apparently he was in bed for a week after taking a surf lesson, right? And so he is cut off from the thing that's very clearly working out is important. You don't have a body like that if you don't work out
So true.
constantly,
And you can
right?
work out and still not have a body like that, but go
And
ahead.
still have a body like that, right? So, I mean, this is a young man who clearly liked to exercise. He clearly was an outdoorsman, right? And all of a sudden, he's in a situation where he can't function in that way. Apparently, other people have said his chronic pain was so bad that he had a hard time having relationships. And I don't know what exactly that means. If it means that, you're in so much pain that you can't fulfill the needs of someone else. I think the implication too is that it made him sexually dysfunctional. I'm not completely sure that that's true, but that seems to be the implication. So this is a young man who's had a lot of things taken away from him, right? And he's had things taken away, he's had things taken away, he's had things taken away. And then on top of that, he starts to retreat. He moves away from his family and friends. So I do think that we should worry about what's going on with him psychologically.
Doctor, the only factual thing I'm going to say, and you have it all right, except that's when he decided to have surgery. So he has all this chronic pain. And then he writes on his Reddit account that I believe is his Reddit account. I've read the whole thing. It's absolutely him. It's so singular, what we call singular in nature, that it couldn't be anybody else seemingly. I mean, he talks about him, his situation, where he was at, just the whole thing. So it's him. And he says, I was cured. So in 2023, he has back surgery. He essentially says, oh my gosh, I can stand, I can sit, I'm without pain. And it's after that. So he was in Hawaii, but he quits his job. Why does he quit his job? Specifically, and I will tell you, Doc, I've dug so deep into this case. I think
Yeah,
I've pulled
I don't
everything
know
out of,
about the Reddit account.
yeah.
I
I
always
think,
get comments where it's like, "Oh, you don't know anything about the case," and it's like, it's really hard to know
no,
everything about the case,
you know
unless you're Jen Coffindaffer, and then,
You know so much about it. Listen, I have insomnia and I sit there and with a case like this that I'm really have I'd like to think I've read almost everything there is to read or see about him. But in any event, he was basically quote unquote cured. And after that, he traveled in Hawaii. By the way, he quit his job, what he says. And so I'm taking him at his word is because he said he was bored. He said, it paid pretty darn good, but I was just bored. And I get that. You're sitting there. He said he was at a computer. He worked from home, which was in Hawaii. Then the surfing accident happens. Then he has the surgery. Then he is fine. He goes back to Hawaii, does all this hiking and just
this
again,
is in the Reddit account? This is Reddit. This is
oh,
not
Reddit,
widely
but
known.
it's really the chronology of all of this now has really been tracked on a lot of platforms. A lot of the New York Times did a really good article that, if I could say, is kind of one place to get a lot of this. The New York Times article is really good at chronicalizing everything. Not everything, but they took the big things. So then he goes to Hawaii and then he decides, and then he sees family too. He runs all around Maryland, sees family. Then he goes to China, or I'm sorry, Japan, Asia, I should say. He goes to Japan and he goes to Thailand. He spends a lot of time there. We don't know how long, because now we're into, the mid to deep part of 2023, going into 24. And then in July of 2024, nada. But
Right.
remember, he says, I went to go find my Zen. He's traveling all over, Asia. I don't know what happens there. Also, there's a discussion, and this is what I wanted to ask you about psychedelics. He talks
Yeah.
about that he became involved using those. What have you seen with people who use them? And is this even worth the discussion?
Actually, I have a surprising view on this. Actually, I don't have a surprising view because the data is pretty good at demonstrating it. Actually, psychedelics are pretty good drugs, and they're pretty good for things like depression as well. I know you didn't expect me to say that, but if you look
No.
at the data, it's absolutely true. In fact, there are psychedelics that are used specifically to treat depression. Again, I am not defending anything. I don't think mental illness in any of these cases is a defense. I think it would maybe potentially prevent him from actually standing trial, which, as I've already pointed out, is exactly what he wants. And it's exactly, well, I don't know if it's what he wants. It's exactly what we should want as people who are followers of true crime and followers of the court system. But I don't know. I don't know. I'm speculating, 100% speculating here. Traveling in that sort of neurotic, weird way where you're going to all these different places, that also could be kind of seen as disorganized. So I'm going to be very interested in a lot of things. I'm going to be interested in, is the travel just like going on vacation, or is the travel sort of weirdly disorganized and kind of running all over everywhere? You get to do that when you have money. A good example of this is John Hinckley. John Hinckley, if you look through the history of John Hinckley, he has all of this incredible, not very organized travel. He's going back and forth to all these different places. In John Hinckley's case, it was DC to follow both Carter and Reagan. And then it was, Nor Yale, I can't think of a word, New Haven to, write notes to Jodie Foster, and then Texas, where his sister is. And he kind of ran around a lot as well. And so I don't know, but here's some things to question about Luigi Mangione. You're running around all over the world. You're going here, you're going there, you're going, all over. And then you completely cut yourself off from everyone. And the next thing we know, you're shooting someone. I don't know. We probably should be asking questions about whether this person is competent to stand trial.
And I appreciate this
Did I just ruin
discussion.
your view?
No, you know what? I really appreciate it because in some cases, and this has been one of them, I look at Brian Thompson, who, by the way, 3/4 of the people have no idea who he even killed, other than he was a CEO of United Healthcare. That to me is so pathetic. I try to put him most of the time in my hashtags, just to keep his name out there. I've almost given up, obviously when I'm strictly talking about Luigi, I just put Luigi, but it's really sad. This is a guy, and he went to the University of Iowa. I misstated it as Iowa State. It's the University of Iowa. He went to state schools. He went to public school. He himself was a valedictorian. His kids go to public school. He wasn't at all well off. He is your average Joe, meaning Brian Thompson, the person who was shot. He
Right.
gets in and he works his way up through the system to become a CEO. He really is the quite essential Iowa kid who comes from nothing to speak of and makes his own way, going to a little state college and getting this huge job and huge opportunity. And by the way, for people who have seen his home, they're nice homes. I think they're both over $500,000. One I think was 800, and one was barely over $1 million, I should say. These are not, I mean, I know you've seen some homes that they're jaw dropping, right? This is not that. Where
You
Luigi
would think a
Mangione,
CEO would of a major healthcare company would have a pretty damn nice house, right? Housing
and
prices have raised so high that $500,000 is even that could be a middle class home, right?
this is my exact point. Even making millions, because we know his salary. He didn't live like that. And I call that your tapes, right? When you have grown up modestly, you don't just all of a sudden get a huge paycheck and not skimp and not worry about this and that. I'm just saying, generally speaking, this is what I believe typically happens with people who are self-made, because they're not used to all of that wealth. And it seemed like he lived like that. He had his kids in public school, you
That's
know?
amazing. That's very unusual. I mean, I'm not going to take away from the fact that he made some pretty, I don't love the decisions that he made as CEO of I'm a little worried
Mhm.
about making him a working class hero now, but I do totally see your point, right? As a person who also came from extremely modest means myself, I completely understand your point of there's a weird sense in which you're always a little bit of like a duck out of water, even when you are in a situation where you've made money. So, but I don't want to make him too much of a working class hero, but I absolutely get your point that Luigi Mangione is someone who comes from tremendous wealth, from what I understand. I'll bet his parents don't live in a modest
Oh,
home.
no. You should
Right.
see the homes and the country clubs. I mean, they're worth 100,000,000 from
Are
what I've
they?
read. Yeah. They and guess how they made their living? And this I find interesting, and I wanted to ask you about it. It's not country clubs, it's healthcare. They ran nursing homes, and from a lot of what I have read, the way
Uh-huh.
they ran their nursing homes was not, like a lot of people are turned down. A lot of people don't get the care they need. They didn't have a good rating on a lot of their homes in terms of, I guess, issues of going to the bathroom in their beds not being taken care of. There's all these percentages. I mean, I read a lot about their nursing homes. And I always wondered if that's
Wow.
one of the boxes that was checked, possibly.
Wow. So who is he making the statement to? Right.
Exactly. That was
Exactly.
what I was thinking when I'm
Right.
reading this whole thing. Is this really about nationwide healthcare? Or is the fact you disown your parents, you want everyone, or not disown, but segregate yourself. You want everyone to know you did it with your money, this whole thing, and how they made their money. Are you doing this to them?
Yeah, I mean, I again, I mean, I this is why I'm worried about again, let's be clear, I'm not saying he's not guilty. I'm not saying any of those things. I'm saying I want to know more
Yeah.
about this person's I want to know what happened here, and also I want to know who this is about. So, people are making this guy a folk hero about healthcare, and I'm glad that we're talking about healthcare. I work in healthcare. I'm definitely want to do that. But when you know that about his family, it does make you wonder, who's the statement towards? You didn't slaughter your parents, right? But slaughtering your parents would not have made the statement about how bad this system is, right? We would have just thought he was was a family annihilator or whatever. I guess it's not quite a family annihilator, right? But he goes out and kills a CEO of a healthcare system that wasn't even his healthcare system. Who is he making the statement
Well,
against here?
and let's take it even one step further. The embarrassment. The fact that grandma has $30,000,000, but has specifically said, if you commit a crime, you're charged with a crime, all that about a crime. This family seems to have a true moral compass. Like they again, the grandfathers now talk about a true somebody who started with absolutely nothing, came to this country, had 10 children, and built an empire. That that's his grandfather.
On the other
Um,
hand, built an empire using, not treating elderly people very well, as you
well,
have yourself pointed out.
again, that's some of what I read. Um,
Yep.
but nevertheless, isn't it way more of a statement to leave your family alive and well and let them see what their son did? That they sent to a $40,000 prep school a year, that they sent to Ivy League, this, perfect son that didn't see maybe them as perfect. And now the shame of it all, right? They haven't even gone to any of his hearings. I'm not passing judgment. I'm making a
No, no,
factual
no, no, I get
statement.
your point completely. I completely understand your point. I have a dear, dear friend who is Japanese and has worked in the tourist industry and has worked for Japan for many, many years. And as many, many people know, suicide is looked at quite differently in Japanese culture. There's a lot written
Mhm.
about this. I'm not making any statements that are not, well known. But one of the ways in which you can self-terminate, is to jump in front of a subway car. And I had no idea until he told me this, that doing that is a statement against your parents. And I was like, wow, I'd never heard that. And he was like, oh no, Japanese trains run on time, right? And if you do that, they have to lift the train off the track. It delays everyone. And it is so unbelievably shameful to your family. So there is, there's more social acceptance for acts that self-terminate, but that particular way of doing it is a way of doing this, exactly the gesture that you just used, to your family. And I had never thought about that. And in this case, we have a family that made their fortune in healthcare. We have made a statement. He's become a folk hero, about critiquing healthcare, and now he has mortified and shamed this family in a way that this kind of was the only way in which you could have shamed your family about healthcare, right? Because if he had just killed his family, we would not be having a discussion about healthcare.
No,
That is a
it's a check mark.
fascinating take.
These are these
I mean,
boxes. This is what Coffin Dapper sees as his boxes. I could be totally off base, but when he says checking all these boxes and he doesn't specify, I, I, I just feel like,
wow,
I don't know,
wow.
I might be all
See,
wet.
I love doing this with you, because every single time we have done this together, we learn something from one another. And
Mhm.
that is
For
such,
sure.
I've not heard this analysis from anyone else, right? This is analysis that nobody else has given. And also, can I just say that, like, to all of your fans, this is the woman that, like, is the genius about social media. You were the one that taught me about the Idaho killer and his fake account, and I don't know what fake account it was that,
Oh,
was
I
it
know what
Reddit?
you're talking about.
Oh,
Well, there's
Papa John or something he called himself, and you told me years ago, "Oh, no, 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 that's totally him, and here's all the evidence," and you're doing that with this Reddit account. It's like, wow, we all need to listen to Jen Coffindaffer about her. This
well,
is why she's an FBI agent,
I
right?
will say this very recently, and when I say very recently, just digressing down the rabbit hole of Papa John a little bit. I mean, I felt like I had Papa John left to right, but um, and a source says it is him. But since then, supposedly from that IP address, there was an email sent out. In fact, I think two, or not an email, but two correspondence, two posts. And I'm waiting for trial to see what happens. So that's making me wonder, but then I
Are
keep
you going?
wondering, huh?
Are you gonna go to the trial?
Oh, I'll go to part of it. I'll go to part of it for sure. I won't go to all of it. I mean, we do have a life, right? But I definitely will go to part of it to support the victims. I've become very close to some of the victim family members, and I definitely want to go there to support them and to show my support for them and what they've gone through. I want to digress and go back just a minute about Brian Thompson, because I would be wrong not to point out a couple of things. United Healthcare, Brian Thompson, and many of the others were under close scrutiny by federal authorities for insider trading, for running a monopoly, for a lot of issues. And I know for a fact, and I posted this, they sold their stocks, not all of them, but 1.3 million or something like that. It's just memory. Brian Thompson and the others sold at least that amount or more in February of this year, even though they were under scrutiny and because those cases take forever. So I have read, I understand the AI policy he utilized to make sure that, claims were turned down, or, it's the whole thing, right? You deny them,
Delay,
you
deny, right.
defend it. Yeah, delay, deny, defend. I get it. I get it. And, I wanted to say, I have United Healthcare because almost everyone in the US government has United Healthcare. When I was did my post in the US Virgin Islands, that, and I think you had one other choice, and that was it. I had Blue Cross Blue Shield before that, but then I'm down to almost no choices. I picked United Healthcare, and I've been with them ever since. No one wants to change healthcare companies, and they haven't been bad at all. But I wanted to bring up this because this is a conversation that just irks me. My son recently suffered a horrible concussion. And after that concussion, obviously he was taken by ambulance. I was with him the whole time. We didn't go through the triage process. We went straight into the ER. There was a doctor there and various other people, obviously checking out whether he had feeling, just really assessing him. Okay. He had lost the feeling from here up. He regained it over a couple hours. Cognitively, he was great. Obviously, his back was sore. All he took the whole time he was in there was, I believe, 2 Tylenol. He was given no pain medication. He said he felt good. By 2-3 hours, he had full movement. We left around 4 hours into it. Now, he remained on concussion protocol for 5 weeks. So never played another football game. He just wrestled last week, did great. But all of that aside, this is my point. Guess how much the 3.5 hours in the room is? And I'm going to post this on Twitter. Guess how much? Just take
We're talking about
3.5 hours.
$300,000.
How much?
$300,000?
No, it wasn't that much, but it was about $30,000+.
Oh, it's only that. Okay, so I have it off by
Well,
factor.
no, but I want to make it clear. This is just about a few hours in the ER. The doctor came in after the assessment, left, never saw her again.
Yep.
He was never given any treatment. They did only a CT, 5-minute CT. I went with them. Less than 5 minutes. So like 3 minutes, buzz out. It's not like
I was
an
thinking
MRI.
he was in the hospital all along, but he wasn't. Okay.
No, because, well, they wanted to. And I actually would not allow it. And the only reason is because I'm a EMT, and I keep my certifications up every 2
Oh, I
years.
didn't know that.
And I felt like I could take care of him better. And he really wanted to leave. It was so sterile. You're freezing. They cut all his clothes off, obviously put him in the gown. He had full range of motion. I mean, it was clear he wasn't medically, going to go south. All of his vitals were perfect. Everything was great. And so, do you want to keep him in the hospital for,
No.
evaluation? And it wasn't because of money. It was because it made no sense to me when I could put him in and I could evaluate him. And, that's what we did. And it ended up being a good decision because it was much more comfortable for him and food, just everything. And it was perfect. But my point is, you shouldn't have to go into a room. And so I asked them, delineate down, what are these charges? 12,000 or 13,000, they said, and this is separate from the doctor. This is just the ER. 12,900 or something was for the room for 3.5 hours. And then 8,000 was for the equipment. I said, what equipment? There was no equipment except a pulse oximeter telling us his vitals. That's it. So anyway, I'm getting,
And they gave you Tylenol.
the Tylenol, well, the Gatorade, I think, was $26. He
Yeah,
had a
no,
little teeny
nuts.
Gatorade. But I'm getting the itemized, exactly what everything was. And all I'm going to say is this: the insurance paid doggone near most of it. Not
Wow.
all of it. I mean,
That's
we
not
still
my
have
experience. I will tell you, that's not my experience.
right. And believe me, I know, but I'm just saying both sides of it. That's my discussion, is not only the healthcare companies that are a hot mess, but what about these crazy charges that I also think just need to be discussed as well.
So it's not just healthcare insurance that needs to be discussed, which is absolutely true and completely right. It's healthcare costs that need to be discussed.
Yes.
And also, I think the other point that's salient here that I think you're making is there are no working class heroes here, right? Everyone wants to make it into some statement about working class heroes. I appreciate that. Thompson, you're right. I have a hard time even remembering his name, which is wrong. That's wrong, and that's a real problem.
No.
Fought his way up from I think the lower middle class, that is a wonderful thing, but he fought himself up into a corporation that is deeply, deeply problematic. And perhaps even there was insider trading, right? So on the one hand, he's not really a working class hero either. Luigi Mangione is not even working class, right? Everyone's saying he's a working class hero. He's not even working class, right? And he makes that statement himself that he's not working class, that I was able to do all of these things with my own money, which meant he had money, right? And so we need to get it out of the realm of talking about the folk heroes on either side here and talk about this as what it was. It was a murder. And if it started the conversation about healthcare, I'm sorry that's that's how the conversation was started. It's a conversation we definitely need to have. But I also think you're right that it's not just healthcare, it's not just insurance, but it's also the entire healthcare system. But what are we talking about here? We're talking about a victim and a murderer, right? At the end of the day, no one's a working class hero. We have a dead person who left his family behind, who made some bad choices in his own life, really very problematic choices in his own life. And we have a murderer. And what we're going to have out of all of this is a young man with a lot of potential going to prison for the rest of his life. So I think we need to start seeing this as a horrific tragedy in terms of a murder and a murderer, and stop trying to pretend it's about something else. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's really well said, and a perfect way to close on this. At the end of the day, Luigi Mangione shot someone in the back.
That's right.
Didn't even face him. Shot him in the back and killed him. And Brian Thompson will never have his day in court. I mean, we'll never know. Was he really guilty of that? We know they were investigating him, and that's also taken on a life of its own. We don't know for sure that he was involved in anything illegal because it hasn't been proved in a court of law, and he was innocent when he died, or not
Right.
found
And it
guilty.
doesn't, I mean,
Not
illegal
even
is one thing,
charged.
but right. No, illegal is one thing. And then there's also the moral issues about, the way in which he ran his healthcare company. But none of that is really relevant because he's dead and we can't talk to him about that. And here's this young man who is going to prison for the rest of his life, even at the best case scenario in all of this.
It's such a probably. I mean, you never know. He's got great attorneys, and you never know with jury nullification. All it takes is what I call a sleeper to get in there and get on, that answers all the questions, not truthfully, that they're not predisposed, and they get on that jury. And then all of a sudden you have a hung jury, and you have to do it all again. So you just
My
never
money's
know.
not on that. The other thing I wanna say to everyone, just my last message here is, can we all
Yes.
stop talking about how hot he is? Can we all just it's got the level of disgusting to me that Ted Bundy had, right? Where everyone was talking about,
Yes.
"Oh, but he's such an attractive young man. Nobody who's hot could ever do anything wrong." And it's like, "Really? I don't know. How many hot people do you know that are kind of terrible people?" Yeah, he's an attractive young man who killed someone. That's who he is. And
Would
my
you
friends are going to be really angry for me saying this because I have a lot of friends who think of him as a working class hero and talk constantly about how hot he is. And you know, innocent until proven guilty, but I think it's pretty clear that he acknowledges that he did this.
Yeah. And I agree with all of that. I actually posted on Twitter, I said, if he looked like Crooks, that was the individual who tried to kill Trump and who killed somebody in the audience
Right.
who was not particularly attractive. He skin issues, very pale, just he looked thin. He did not come off like Mangione at all. I
And no
keep
one's talking about
wondering.
him.
No one is talking about him at all. And if Mangione didn't look like Mangione looks, would we even be entertaining all of this hysteria over the case? So
Yep.
something for everybody to think of. It shouldn't, but is it?
Oh, well, I mean, he got caught. I'm sorry, we need to end, but I have to just add this. He got caught Actually, I mean, if you really kind of boil it down, the reason why he was caught is because he was flirting with someone and he pulled down his mask, right? I mean, he had a really good understanding of himself as an extremely attractive young man, right? And so, like, the thing he couldn't not do was not flirt with someone, and he pulled down his mask, and that is why he got caught. So he
Yeah,
had
the
some
irony.
delusions of grandeur otherwise too.
Yeah, and the other thing I've always said too is he had a great plan. 10 days he planned it. He was very patient. He put the whole scheme together, had a great plan for the exit. Where he messed up, he never had a midterm plan or a long-term plan.
Right. There
You
was
know,
no B.
why was he in Altoona, Pennsylvania? He should have immediately gone across the border to Canada, got on a flight, and went back to Asia, and probably, heavens knows how long it would have taken to solve this and to catch him. And they wouldn't have caught him with his, what I call a Frankenstein gun. People
Yep,
in the media
yep.
call it a ghost gun. They love to say ghost gun because it doesn't have a serial number, but it's a Frankenstein gun. You take all these different parts and, you put it all together.
Well,
Um,
Donna Adelson taught us that Vietnam does not have an extradition policy, right?
exactly.
If
And
if this young man wanted to run all over Asia, stop flirting and don't pull down your mask, and apparently go to Vietnam. You should have learned that from Donna Adelson.
I know a lot of mistakes for somebody very smart, but I think it was a fantasy, and he got through all the part of the fantasy, and then when it was over, after a couple days, I think he thought, "What's my plan now?" He didn't have a real exit, long-term exit strategy. I mean, that's clear. Or maybe he would have never gotten caught because he was very good at his planning initially. Dr. Epright, thank you. And for everybody in the audience, I'm sorry we did talk a long time tonight. I appreciate you staying with us. And to the mods, thank you so much. And mostly to Dr. Epright, thank you for spending your evening, a big part of your evening with us. And we'll have you back on the show if you'll come back
Love it.
on the next
Thank
time we
you.
have someone interesting to discuss. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Have a great night.